These are the planes that won wars, veterans from an era when heroes fought in the skies. They're like time machines, granting an immediate link to the past the moment you take hold of their controls. Across Britain, in hangars and workshops, engineers and enthusiasts are locked in a desperate struggle against corrosion, often gluing, patching, or reshaping metal to keep these historic military aircraft airborne. Their mission, to restore and return legendary warbirds to the sky. For these dedicated teams, the hardest battle can be finding the right parts or the funds to fabricate them. Whether the project involves something as iconic as a D-Day-era transport plane, a ground attack jet from the latter part of the 20th century, or a legendary lifesaver that once turned the tide of war, each restoration is a story in itself. As one engineer puts it, "I can only fly as high as I'm prepared to fall," highlighting the element of risk inherent in bringing such old machines back to flight-worthy condition. Yet this work can be unpredictable. If an engine suddenly fails, the entire project may be set back weeks or months while a desperate search for spares ensues. It takes serious money, sometimes £3 to £6 million, to find and purchase the necessary replacement parts. And it takes unwavering dedication to work around the clock, often in freezing conditions, just to keep a single project on schedule. Fingers go numb, tools freeze, but the goal is always the same: get that rare and precious aircraft flying again. One particular workshop has set out on a unique, ambitious quest to modify a single-seat fighter into a two-seat version. It's an exceptionally rare plane, being the only one of its kind currently in existence. This project involves rewriting history, carefully slicing into a wooden and fabric fuselage that has survived decades, all to install a second seat so that passengers, or perhaps the pilot's own daughter, can share in the magic of flight. For that daughter, just the thought of flying in the same cockpit her parent once did is incredible beyond words. However, the skies that formed the backdrop of the Battle of Britain, once teeming with Hurricanes, Spitfires, and Messerschmitts, are now busy with modern passenger jets and edged with towering apartment blocks. Warbirds, when they appear, are typically glimpsed only at air shows or heritage events. That is why, at a small airfield in southern England, engineers, fabricators, and passionate volunteers are painstakingly rebuilding a classic fighter that saved the nation in 1940. Their pride and joy is a Mark I Hurricane, which they plan to modify into a two-seat trainer, something never officially done in wartime production. Engineer Andrew Wenman leads a team at Hawker Restorations, widely recognized as the world's foremost specialists in rebuilding the Hurricane. Despite its overshadowed status next to the Spitfire, Andrew firmly believes this aircraft played a critical role in Britain's history and deserves to be in the public eye. Together with Chief Engineer Peter Johnson, Andrew has a hard deadline: the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Britain in September 2020, barely a year away. Hitting that deadline will require every bit of their skill and ingenuity. Andrew's team includes Graham, an expert on every hurricane quirk imaginable; Nick, who handles much of the paint stripping and refurbishing; Brian, their wingman, who often finds himself using only a torch and a mirror to tighten bolts in tiny compartments, plus Rich and Phil, who manage systems installation, including engine cooling, pneumatics, hydraulics, and all the critical plumbing. They're all self-described petrol heads, but in this game, pure love for vintage machinery is not enough. It takes precision, patience, and endless problem-solving. Their Hurricane, registered as AE505, sometimes referred to as 1505, is one of fewer than 20 airworthy Hurricanes remaining worldwide. Converting it from a single-seat fighter to a two-seat trainer involves carefully cutting into the wooden fuselage section. Wartime crews nicknamed it the doghouse. This radical modification allows them to add a second seat behind the pilot. Before making any irreversible cuts, the team is constructing a test airframe so they can identify any design flaws or structural risks. Once they finalize their redesign, they'll transfer the modifications to AE505 itself. Even then, there's no guarantee the Civil Aviation Authority, CAA, will approve the changes. But Andrew and his team are confident that, with the best design engineers and the most hurricane experience in the world, they will succeed. Back in 1940, Over 14,000 Hurricanes were built. When the Battle of Britain raged in the skies, Hurricanes actually outnumbered Spitfires by almost 1,000. Yet newsreels from the time often highlighted the Spitfire. The Hurricane was largely relegated to a supporting role, despite having scored 55% of the RAF's aerial victories. After the Battle of Britain, Hurricanes shifted from air-to-air combat to ground attack duties. They became tank busters, anti-shipping fighters armed with cannons, bombs, and rockets, truly versatile machines. Sergeant John Brooks, for example, piloted Hurricanes during the disastrous Dieppe raid and on missions attacking E-boat pens. He later flew against flying bomb sites in France and Holland, living under canvas and taking off from grass strips that left him and others exposed to the elements. Today, Sergeant Brooks' daughter, Eugenie, cherishes his logbook and mementos, such as his weathered flying boots. She recalls the nightmares her father endured after the war, and how he once found it impossible to watch any documentary footage featuring the sounds of machine guns and Merlin engines. Over time, especially as she pursued a high-intensity career in the Metropolitan Police, becoming one of its first female armed officers, father and daughter forged a new bond over shared experiences of risk, challenge, and duty. Meanwhile, at a rural Suffolk airfield, Andrew's team continues the painstaking reconstruction of AE-505. Now repainted in the markings of Sergeant T. Brooks's 1-74 squadron, the aircraft features the call sign L for Love. Typically, they reconstruct or replace any parts damaged or corroded since its 1940s assembly in Canada. Through this hands-on experience, they grasp how terrifying it must have been for inexperienced teenagers to strap into these fighters and go to war. Andrew admires how much punishment Hurricanes could absorb and remain flyable, yet laments that the Spitfire seems to garner most of the public glory. By late 2019, Andrew's group nears a critical phase, designing and fitting an extended cockpit canopy to accommodate a passenger, someone who could experience what it feels like to fly in a Hurricane firsthand. They salvage original wartime components where possible and machine missing parts on 1930s-style equipment. Rigorous precision is key, with some tolerances measured to thousandths of an inch. The new rear cockpit must accommodate full flight controls for training or demonstration flights without interfering with the redesigned seatbelts, the rerouted electrical wiring, or the critical manual hydraulic systems used to raise and lower the landing gear. In November of that same year, they prepared to test run the Merlin engine for the first time in 2 years. Tied down to prevent any sudden surge or runaway, the engine stubbornly refuses to start. Fuel can gum up the carburetor, or an overlooked filter can sabotage their best-laid plans. After a few more attempts, they face the reality that their day's test will not happen as planned. Thankfully, the difficulty turns out to be a simpler mixture setting issue in the carburetor, and by early 2020, they correct the problem. Another minor but time-consuming step involves recalibrating the aircraft's compass, an essential navigation instrument that can be thrown off by any newly added metal components. Moreover, AE-505's owners need the plane to earn its keep. Valued around $2.5 million, the Hurricane must generate revenue if it is to continue flying. At Biggin Hill in Kent, famous for its Battle of Britain heritage, operators running the world's largest fleet of Spitfires are keenly interested in 505. They envision offering flights where paying customers can not only experience a Spitfire ride, but also enjoy the thrill of flying in the only two-seat Hurricane in the world. Everything hinges on official approval from the CAA. By spring 2020, Andrew's team has completed the conversion, and test pilot Stu Goldspink takes AE-505 into the skies. It's a tense moment. No one knows exactly how the Hurricane will handle with an added seat and revised center of gravity. Yet, despite a few small teething problems, like a canopy that doesn't seal perfectly, Stu touches down triumphantly, noting that 505 might actually fly more smoothly than before. The team can scarcely contain their joy. Come September 2020, coinciding with the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, AE-505 reports for duty at Biggin Hill. It now stands ready to fly, paying passengers on nostalgic, once-in-a-lifetime trips. One of the first in line is Sergeant Brooks's daughter, Eugenie. Carrying her late father's photograph as she climbs aboard, she's flown by warbird pilot Anna Walker. From the cockpit, they trace the coastline, glimpsing the very fields, estuaries, and hangars Sergeant Brooks once knew. The Hurricane's distinctive Merlin roar stirs powerful emotions, and the flight seems to pass in a heartbeat. Upon landing, Eugenie confirms what many hurricane enthusiasts have said for years. This aircraft is more than just a machine. It's a living piece of history, a tribute to the young men who fought and died to defend Britain. While the Spitfire often remains the poster boy of the Battle of Britain, the Hurricane's faithful service and remarkable resilience make it every bit as worthy of admiration. For the engineers at Hawker Restorations and the heritage pilots at Biggin Hill, offering flights in the newly created two-seat Hurricane is both a technical triumph and a deeply personal privilege. They have resurrected a legend, enabling a new generation to grasp, if only briefly, what it meant to fight in the skies of 1940. For some, that flight is an emotional pilgrimage, communion with a father's memory, or an homage to aircrew who never came home. For others, it's a chance to embrace living history, to smell the oil and fuel, hear the Merlin's roar, and feel the rush of air at 200 miles an hour. An invitation to step back in time and appreciate the extraordinary courage it took to climb into that cockpit when Britain's fate hung in the balance.